We will wait just one more second for the panelists to be on the stage. And thank you so much for being so diligent. We are very much on time to start the second panel. It is a pleasure for me to be here with all of you. It feels like a big family reunion. And in this second panel, we will basically focus on the challenges in whistleblowing practices. We want to look into real-world problems. We want to look into obstacles on organizational resistance, inconsistency across countries, difficulties in collaboration. And we have a very exciting panel with Professor Kate Kenny. Kate is a professor of business and society at the University of Galway in Ireland. She has researched whistleblowing for over 10 years and authored 3 books and numerous journal articles on the topic. With Marie Terracol. Marie is a whistleblower protection lead in Transparency International. She leads the movement global policy and advocacy effort on whistleblowing and supports national chapters worldwide to strengthen whistleblowing protection laws and mechanisms in the countries. With Joan Llinares, who is a lawyer who has worked as a civil servant for over 40 years. And he was the director of the Agency for Prevention and Fight Against Corruption of the Valencian community, the first institution of the protection of whistleblowers in Spain. Previously also worked in Barcelona City Council as head of transparency and good practices. And last but not least, Benedek is the head of representation of Budapest to the EU and former member of the European Parliament, and even a former member of the Hungarian National Assembly. And he basically was a strong advocate of a possible European directive for the protection of whistleblowers in cooperation with the whistleblowing community and academia. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to Benedek to give us his first statement.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation, especially for Vigilanza, who remembered the times we started to cooperate on whistleblowing. And before starting to talk about the challenges of whistleblowing, I think that it makes sense to go back a little bit to the origins of the Whistleblower Directive. And of course, many excellent NGOs and experts had been already working a lot on a European level regulation for whistleblowing. But when I arrived to the European Parliament in 2014, and as a politician, I started to advocate the idea of having a European level protection for whistleblower, very soon we just bump into a complete rejection, resistance from the Commission side, arguing that there is no proper legal basis for a European level whistleblowing directive, there is no political appetite in the Council, and so on and so forth. And we keep on going and try to convince European decision makers that this is something really needed. In 2014, perhaps 2 things happened which suddenly changed a little bit the landscape of the discussions on European protection for whistleblowers. First, that we had an idea that it's not enough to simply to lobby for, in general, for a possible protection or possible regulation for the protection of whistleblowers, but we have to put something very tangible, very concrete on the table. And we were lucky enough to meet with Vigilanza and Alberto Alemanno, by the way, and started to work together on a practical proposal, on a written draft directive on whistleblowing to argue or to prove that it is possible. Because beforehand there was a lot of talks, but always the Commission rejection was received with different arguments why it is not possible. We, after a couple of months of intensive work, mainly made by the experts, we put on a table a very concrete draft proposal which proved that there is a possible legal basis for a whistleblower protection directive in the EU, and all the technical problems which were raised by the Commission, they are possible to be solved. So it's not impossible to adopt a whistleblower protection directive. The other big change was the general environment, and that's what I would like to talk a little bit, because this was the time of big whistleblowing scandals. So you may remember still the LuxLeaks scandal in 2014, then in 2016, the Panama Papers. All scandals started by whistleblowers, which basically undermined the belief, very much the belief that the democratic institutions and the democratic system is properly protecting the interest of the people, and that whistleblowers play a very important role in unveiling the wrongdoings of the political and economic elite. So we would need a better protection for whistleblowers to help them to act and to come to the public with the information they have. And this was, I think, the real change maker at the time, that the general environment, the societal environment was completely changing at those times, and the public was following very closely those cases. So the court case in Luxembourg against Antoine Deltour, the LuxLeaks whistleblower, there was a lot of public attention, especially, of course, you all know that who was at the time the president of the Commission and which country he was coming from. So there were some rumors that what could be the link between the actual president of the European Commission and the wrongdoings in Luxembourg. So suddenly the entire environment had been changed. And the Commission started to express interest towards the idea how to settle this deficit of trust against the European institutions. And that's why they started to talk. And of course, they took our proposal, rewrite it completely. That's how the Commission works, that they get an idea, then forget everything which was already had been done there, and to make something completely new. But that's that was the point where they started to work on the whistleblower directive. I think that the rest is history, and we work with a lot of excellent experts in and outside the European institutions. Zeta was here in the previous panel. She made an excellent work in the Commission. Anna Myers also in the previous panels. A lot of allies. It was a great road to walk together while we arrived in 2019 to the adoption of the whistleblower protection directive of the EU. What was the expectations with the directive at that time? It's already 10 years ago. We believe that with a better protection for whistleblowers, we can really create a stronger trust in democratic institutions, with creating a guarantee or a safeguard that all the wrongdoings which the political, economic elites are doing will be reported to the public. We are here in 2025. And what has been changed, and what is the situation of whistleblowing in the EU right now? On the one hand, of course, there are very important and very positive developments. We are having the directive, it's implemented, transposed to the most of the member states' legal system. There are very good examples how it works. On the other hand, I think that there are serious threats to whistleblowing in Europe. And I think this is something we have to understand, because I'm coming from Hungary. And you know that what has been happening in Hungary in the past 15 years. And I think that Hungary is the prime example that after the transitions in 89-90 in Hungary, a lot of democratic institutions were introduced. They functioned very well. Everybody was very satisfied that, wow, the country is democratized and everything is fine. And then suddenly, after 2010, we realized that institutions and legal frameworks themselves are not enough to create democracy. And I think that with the whistleblowing directive and the member state level regulation for the protection of whistleblowers, it's a little bit the same case. It's very important to have the right institutions. It's very important to have the right regulation. But without a wider societal environment, and there were questions in the previous panel from Kosovo, from Georgia, where the societal environment in general and the legal and political environment in general is not supporting whistleblowers and whistleblowing, the institutions and the regulation themselves will be not enough to protect them properly. And I think that this is something very important to acknowledge, that we are experiencing a heavy decline in democracy, not only in the US or outside the EU, but in the EU as well, and not only in Hungary or not only in Slovakia. It's an overall European phenomenon. And against this background, we have enough reason to be worried about the future of whistleblowing. So without a strong rule of law, without a strong protection for democracy, democratic institutions in the member states, there will be no safe environment for whistleblowers, and there will be no, just because of the existing whistleblower protection regulation, there will be no safe environment for this whole exercise. On the other hand, and I will stop here, also it is important to note that to keep democracy alive, and to make the political, institutional, and legal environment supportive to everyone and to defend democratic rights, we need whistleblowers more than ever. Because most of the wrongdoings, also in Hungary, where we have a lot of bad examples how people started to talk publicly, and after what they received in exchange, retaliation, political hate-mongering campaigns, and so on and so forth. Even in Hungary, but all the other illiberal countries, whistleblowers are playing an extremely important role to unveil all the anti-democratic wrongdoings of the political elite. So while we need the entire rule of law, democratic environment to protect whistleblowers, also we need whistleblowers to unveil how our countries are falling into anti-democratic systems and what are those things are happening behind the public. So we need more whistleblowers than ever, but we have to be aware that beyond the existing regulation, we need the entire democratic ecosystem around whistleblowers to make it possible.
Thank you so much for setting us into this like political and cultural landscape in Europe. I will now go to Marie to give her opening statement.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I thought I'd touch upon a little bit around the challenges that CSOs who support whistleblower are facing nowadays, because they do have a key role in supporting the implementation of the directive. And so taking the example of Transparency International, we have a number of national chapters who are provided legal advice and other kind of supports to whistleblower, and they face similar challenges in doing that. So revolving around protection for themselves and for the whistleblower, and also funding, like from a very practical perspective, because to provide support to whistleblowers, obviously you need funds to do that, and very few member states are supporting financially CSOs to do that. even in countries where they actually officially signpost whistleblowers to those particular CSOs to get advice. So in some countries they do that, for example, Italy and Slovenia, but there is no support there. So there are like some good practices in that sense as well. Some countries do provide support, like in Sweden or Ireland, but yeah, I would say that's really not enough. Maybe just going to like the second challenge is, and I think it's all linked to the fact that the role of CSOs is not acknowledged or recognized in most of the whistleblowing laws in the country. So, and that creates a number of problems in the sense that it's not really clear the amount, like the protection that they have as CSOs, and as I mentioned again, like the whistleblowers, because I mean, for example, what happened if an authority asked the CSO to reveal the identity of a whistleblower who went to them for advice? And like when a whistleblower goes to a CSO, is it considered a public disclosure, for example? So in some of the laws, it's really unclear, and obviously it presents a number of risks for the whistleblower. And there are also, and actually, so in Latvia, which I think is a great example, the law does give a specific role to CSOs. They basically, like, CSOs are entitled to provide consultations to whistleblowers. They also can apply to authorities and courts on the behalf of whistleblowers, and they can also act as an intermediary, so a contact point between the whistleblower and the person who handled their report. So I think that's a great example, maybe to give inspiration to other member states to go that way. And maybe as a final point, I want to also talk about the protection of CSOs themselves who support whistleblowers, because, well, it's not always appreciated, I would say, and they do take risks, many in doing that. Sometimes, like, they're a victim of smear campaigns, of slap suits, or they're being threatened with the loss of funding. And we've seen that, well, particularly outside Europe, but also there are examples, for example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where Global Leaks and another CSO defending whistleblowers were really attacked that way, and that's very damaging. And of course, when a CSO with a small budget is, being slapped by a very rich individual or company, that's become a real problem. Maybe as a good example, Anna mentioned earlier that in France, the law does specifically protect CSOs who provide advice to whistleblowers. So I think that's maybe food for thoughts as well for other member states. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next one is Joan. Joan speaking Spanish because he's Spanisher. So I will support with the translation, and we will do like a little bit of back and forwards. We do this because of the evident value of like bringing European values all together, and also because like we have the commitment to basically break those any barriers that can like limit those collaborations. And I personally think that his personal experience and knowledge has an incredible value. So I hope you can appreciate that in the next 5 minutes. Joan, please.
Muchas gracias, Bruno, por hacer de traductor también, y muchísimas gracias a Win por haberme invitado a estar aquí con ustedes, donde foros como este, donde sociedad civil, instituciones y expertos nos podemos encontrar y debatir una cuestión tan importante como la problemática de los whistleblowers.
He basically appreciates like being all together here to discuss this important issue and being all together with all of you.
En lugares donde existen autoridades de protección en España, Estas son de ámbito regional, puesto que la autoridad nacional todavía no está operativa en un claro incumplimiento de la directiva Whistleblower.
There are some whistleblowing protection authorities in Spain, but there is no national authority, even if the directive says otherwise.
En mi época de autoridad anticorrupción y de protección de los whistleblowers entre 2017 y 2024 en la Comunidad Valenciana, aplicamos una ley regional que me otorgaba poderes para proteger a los whistleblowers, incluso mucho antes de que se aprobara la directiva en 2019. Pero tropezamos en ocasiones con represalias contra denunciantes que con mi potestad sancionadora no se pudo impedir cuando estas represalias se judicializaban y los denunciantes quedaban a expensas de lo que decidían los tribunales.
So in his time as Anti-Corruption and Whistleblowing Protection Authority between 2017 and 2024, so last year, in the Valencian community, he applied the regional law that gave him power to protect whistleblowers even long before the directive was approved in 2019. But sometimes they encountered retaliation against whistleblowers that his sanctioning power could not prevent when these reprisals were judicialized and whistleblowers were left at the expense of what the court decided.
Incluso cuando la directiva ya estaba aprobada, había tribunales que se negaban a aplicar o interpretar la ley bajo los preceptos de la directiva. Recientemente hemos tenido un caso de un funcionario policía local en un municipio, Torrevieja, provincia de Alicante, que tras denunciar corrupción en su ayuntamiento, años antes incluso de que existiera la agencia que dirigí, comenzó a sufrir represalias en forma de aislamiento, negación de permisos, vacaciones, impedimento de formación, pérdidas de retribuciones, expedientes disciplinarios sin motivo, obligando al funcionario a denunciar a los tribunales como única alternativa para que se pusiera freno a dichas represalias. Sin embargo, no se consiguió, incluso cuando la directiva ya estaba aprobada y el funcionario tenía el estatuto de persona protegida por la BAF, por la agencia que dirigía.
So, even when the directive was already approved, there were courts that refused to apply or interpret the law under the precepts of the directive. Recently, they had a case of a local police official in the municipality of Torrevieja, Alicante, who, after denouncing corruption in his town, began to suffer reprisals in forms of isolation, denial of leave, impediment of training, loss of remuneration, unfunded disciplinary proceeding, etc., forcing the official to denounce to the courts as the only alternative to put a stop to such reprisals. However, he failed. Joan failed, even when the directive was already approved and the official had the status of protected person by the authority he led.
El Tribunal Superior de Justicia de la Comunidad Valenciana le negó el amparo y luego también el mismo Tribunal Supremo. Y ha tenido que ser recientemente el Tribunal Constitucional quien reprochara a los jueces y magistrados de estos tribunales que debían haber amparado al funcionario. Desde el año 2017, la BAF le acompañó y amparó legalmente para dar todos estos pasos hasta el mismo Tribunal Constitucional, que reconoció en su sentencia que estaba muy justificado el estatuto de protección que yo le otorgué desde la agencia.
The High Court of Justice of the Valencian community denied him protection, and then also the Supreme Court. But finally, the Constitutional Court told the previous judges that they should have protected the civil servant. So since 2017, the agency accompanied him and legally protected him to take all these steps until the Constitutional Court recognizing the protection status granted by him was justified.
Mientras todo esto pasaba y al estar el procedimiento judicializado, no era posible adoptar medidas sancionadoras contra la administración represaliadora, el ayuntamiento. Tras la sentencia del Tribunal Constitucional, el alcalde y otros represaliadores del ayuntamiento podían ser sancionados con una multa de hasta 400.000 euros, según la ley valenciana. Pero dudo que esto ahora se haga efecto, pues mi sucesor en la dirección de la agencia, tras un cambio legislativo, ha sido nombrado por el mismo partido que represaliaba a este funcionario y del que forma parte el alcalde, sin ninguna clase de consenso parlamentario.
So while all this was going on, and as the proceedings were in court, it was not possible to take punitive measures against the city council. After the sentence of the Constitutional Court, the mayor and other retaliators of the town hall could be sanctioned with a fine up to 400,000 euros according to the Valencian law. But he Joan doubt that this will be done as his successor in the agency has been appointed by the same party of the mayor without any parliamentary consensus.
Casos similares han sido habituales, donde los tribunales no han amparado a los denunciantes. Tenemos un problema. Si las decisiones de la autoridad de protección no están equiparadas a las de una autoridad judicial, difícilmente se va a poder proteger. Podemos estar haciendo creer a los denunciantes que van a estar protegidos y luego no ser así, porque los poderes administrativos, políticos o judicial impiden esta protección. De este modo, la protección puede convertirse en una trampa para los whistleblowers. Solo nos quedaría, para poder denunciar con una seguridad, hacerlo desde el anonimato.
So similar cases have been common where the courts have failed to protect the whistleblowers. We have a problem. If the decisions of the protection authorities are not equal to those of the judicial authorities, it will be difficult to protect them. We may be making whistleblowers believe that they are going to be protected, and then they are not, because the administrative and judicial powers prevent these protections. In this way, protection can become a trap for the whistleblowers. The only thing left for us to do is to denounce anonymously. Thank you so much. Thanks. So we will now turn to Kate for the initial remarks.
Thank you very much, and I suppose my remarks kind of link to what the other speakers were talking about on this morning. So I'll be speaking to, I'm privileged to be a member of the BRIGHT project, and the work package I lead focuses specifically on gender and intersectionality within EU directive implementation. So I suppose for about a year now we've been looking into it. You recall one of the team actually approached a senior ombudsperson in a country that will remain anonymous to ask, just informally, what are you guys doing in terms of assessing reports for how you can support with regards to gender and race? And the person was kind of taken aback and said, there's nothing to see here. We're interested in the law, you know? The law is blind, the law is neutral, and this kind of idea. So we don't need to collect data on gender and race and other intersectionality dimensions. And I think that since we've started the project, looking at what different civil society organizations and organizations that collect data and that work with whistleblowers, what people are doing in that space, we've kind of had the same attitude. And look, I really want to be clear, this isn't, our research team is not blaming anyone. There's been so much effort to get the law in place and to put the protections in place. But this is the next stage. As Benedek says, democracy is under threat, and in parts of the world, DEI and gender-focused initiatives are similarly under threat. So we must see the two projects as hand in hand, and that's where we're at. Anytime you have something claiming to be a blind form of a sort of neutral justice, whether it's law or a speak-up policy or a speak-up system, you often have to look at who is the imagined person coming forward to this law, under this law, or within this speak-up system, and who is left out of it. Usually there's a kind of, the the classic conception of the human in this kind of formalist, blind legal process is often male, able-bodied, middle class, and without any accessibility issues, and probably speaking English at the same time. If you happen to fall outside of that particular category, maybe the law is not serving you as fully as it might be. Maybe the speak-up system is not enabling you to disclose with the same capability of someone else. That's what we're looking at with regards to these new changes that the EU directive is bringing in across Europe. So we absolutely welcome the directive, and we absolutely welcome moving on to the next stage. A great person to look to is Professor Miranda Fricker. So she talks about epistemic justice. And it's really pertinent to whistleblowing because epistemic justice says who gets to be seen as a credible knowledge giver. So who is allowed to be a knower and a discloser and who is not? And this is kind of the framework that we're looking at. She talks about there's two elements, credibility deficits. So that's if you're working in an industry and say for reason of your race, your ethnicity or your gender, you're seen as less credible, less belonging to the norm of who workers are in that sector. Well then perhaps you come to your whistleblowing claim with already a credibility deficit, and Miranda Fricker explains this in the context of access to justice. Iris Marion Young, another philosopher, looks at structural deficits. And that means that if you're trying to access, say, a system of justice using the structures, the law, or the speak-up system, and because of who you are, you're differently able to do that, then we have this kind of structural deficit. So let's apply those theories, is what we're doing in this practice, or in this work package, to the whistleblowing initiatives. So what have we done? There's a report, I recommend you read it. We've assessed the civil society work being done across Europe and what they're doing in relation to gender, race and intersectionality. We found really interesting best practice initiatives that I'd be happy to discuss. First of all, what we found, number one, is although there's many civil society organizations that would like to do this, resources are tight. So we're focusing on the ones that have been kind of ahead of the game and what are they doing in terms of best practice. The second thing we're doing as part of this is we're going to need more data. So organizations, and we're grateful to Protect UK, to WIN, to Transparency International in Dublin for allowing us to test our methodology on organizations that are gathering data about who's coming forward, either to helplines or whistleblowers, and how gender is treated and race and class within those systems. What can we tell already? Because we are taking an intersectionality approach, which basically means that just because you have one particular social category, it doesn't mean that the other social categories that you work with cannot be used against you in order to sort of affect your whistleblowing. One example from Ireland, for example, he's now a senator, Tom Clonan, and and oddly, the retaliation against him was gendered, but he's obviously a male, but he was in the defense forces and spoke up over 20 years ago about systemic sexual violence and sexual harassment with among his female colleagues. He was vilified and ostracized, and retaliation remains a problem for him despite being a senator in the Irish government. But his son has a disability, and Tom speaks widely about it, and that disability in the family was actively used as a form of reprisal against him. So oddly, we had the figure of a male with sort of gender-based reprisal and disability use. So it's a classic example of an intersectional moment where the social categories, because of that particular context, defence forces, Ireland at the time, very hierarchical, we had this coming together to shape the whistleblowing experience for that individual. So we're building an intersectionality approach into what we're looking for. So what I would say, just to close, if you're an organization who's in the position of gathering data around any of these, please do get in touch with our project. I'm working with great researchers at University of Galway, and we'd be happy to kind of discuss with you any of these sorts of areas. And then do read our report as well. And yeah, I'd be happy to give more examples as we go forward in the conversation.
Thank you so much for that. And well, we will now turn into a more conversation mode. And I basically wanted to steer you all into a more solution-oriented mindset, if that makes sense. We have spent some time talking about the challenges and the problems that we have from different perspectives. And when addressing or thinking about these challenges and solutions, I was wondering about the role of collaboration. This is a concept that came up in different parts of these introductory remarks. But I wonder if you could share with me, from your perspective, what is the role of collaboration in a strengthening whistleblowing protection? I'm thinking on like collaboration among member states, among like civil society, among different actors, and this like little community and village that we also heard about in the last panel. Would you like to?
Happy to go.
Yeah, that's great.
So maybe just again, in terms of civil society organization, I mean, we've been working from the beginning across EU member states, so it's been always a common effort, and there is a very active community of civil society organization working on the issue across the EU, and also some trade unions are very active on this, and journalist associations. So we've been trying to. We were advocating together to have the directive adopted, and now we're continuing to work together to ensure that the implementation is as effective as possible. So, for example, we meet very regularly, Transparency International together with the Whistleblowing International Network and the EU Monitor. We've been meeting very regularly with all of civil society in the EU to exchange about, what are the challenges in their country, and maybe trying to seek advice from others who have similar issues in their country, and to share good practices. And of course, we keep looking for opportunity for joint advocacy. So, for example, last year, 2023, we published a report looking at the state of whistleblower protection in 20 countries in the EU, trying to figure out, if they had transposed the directive properly. We found that just looking at 5 areas, actually the answer was no. And if they had, followed best practice when they could. And not all of them have done it in like the 4 areas we looked at, and we keep looking at that, like really trying to map those best practice and those challenges, and we will also publish a similar report this year, looking a bit more maybe at the implementation and trying to highlight those situation in particular, and we'll definitely participate in the public. Consultation, as was mentioned earlier, both for like the EU and so yes, this is the kind of work we're doing across member states.
Thank you so much. Joan, I don't know if you want to share any thoughts on collaboration.
Quiero hacer una referencia especial a la importancia que tiene la sociedad civil organizada. Como antes en el panel anterior, Ana Meyers ha citado, podemos tener magníficas leyes, pero luego estas no se cumplen. Y una forma de exigir ese cumplimiento es desde la propia sociedad civil. En ese sentido.
Sorry, just to translate that. He basically wants to highlight the importance of civil society collaboration with public institutions, because we can have like amazing laws, but without that collaboration, we struggle to protect whistleblowers.
En este sentido, una de las decisiones que se adoptaron en la agencia cuando al principio de ponerla en marcha fue el de establecer un vínculo permanente de la institución de lucha contra la corrupción con la propia sociedad civil, creando un consejo de participación ciudadana donde tenían representación las organizaciones locales, nacionales y alguna internacional, creando un estrecho vínculo de colaboración entre agencia y sociedad civil.
So they basically, in the agency, they decided to create like a permanent consortium of civil society organizations that provide the support to the agency across the path. including local organizations like from their region, national organization from Spain, and also international organizations. And yeah, they basically took this role of advising and oversighting the agency.
Incluso el código ético de la institución creó un comité de ética donde sus miembros mayoritariamente eran personas procedentes de la sociedad civil, expertos en el ámbito jurídico o en el ámbito social, pero ese comité de ética funcionó y hasta que hace unos meses ha sido disuelto, al igual que fue derogado el código ético.
And basically, through this consortium of civil society organizations, they managed to create like a ethic code for the agency. And basically, this was developed through experts and people from expertise from civil society, bringing this into the agency. This has unfortunately been stopped because of the change in the director, and the new director decided to basically get rid of this ethic code. Okay. Yeah.
If I may, colleagues in the panel surely are much more experienced on the details and how it's going on a daily basis. From a wider perspective, or from a political perspective, I completely agree that NGOs and CSOs are a key partners, because for a safe environment for whistleblowing, we need the entire, as I mentioned, the entire environment or the ecosystem of well-functioning democratic institutions. But among them, I think that the NGOs are having an extremely important role. And I would like to remind that it's not only in those member states where there are openly and clearly attacks against the NGOs where this field is under pressure. On the European level, we are witnessing an increasing attack and campaigns against independent NGOs and CSOs. And we just had a short talk with Nick Ayosa, an old friend of mine, in the coffee break to talk about that. We remember that 10 years ago we had some crazy EPP members advocating ideas to introduce new legislation to undermine financing and independence of NGOs. Now it's becoming the mainstream in the European Parliament. And it's changing. And it's not only Hungary or Slovakia or some other countries, it's the entire EU where NGOs have to experience more and more pressure against their independence. So we have to step up against this on the European level. It's not a Hungary problem. The second, which is very important, and of course is nothing new, but again, I think that it's important to underline, it's media freedom. Because without free media, there is no way that whistleblowers can do what they want or what they should do. And in all the major whistleblower cases, there were journalists acting actively and playing an important role. And again, media freedom is under threat. Not only in Europe, perhaps the less in Europe, but also in Europe we have problems. But for example, in the US, and let's have a wider global look, in the US, it's a burning problem that what's going to happen with the independent media. The third issue is the entire institutional system, from independent authorities like anti-discrimination authorities or things like that, which should be well-functioning to effectively protect whistleblowers. But the ultimate protection for whistleblowers is the independent judiciary, against something which we do not have as a natural phenomenon. And it's declining in many member states. So I think that the independence of judiciary is something which is really an essence of the protection of whistleblowers. And finally, when we come to cooperation among member states, of course we can have many positive examples how member states can cooperate on the protection of whistleblowers, but let me to come up with a negative example when member states help each other to save those whose wrongdoings were unveiled in the member states. Perhaps for Vigilanza, the name of Nikola Gruevski is not completely new. He is a former Prime Minister of North Macedonia, who was condemned to prison in his own country, and the Hungarian government, with diplomatic means, saved him from Macedonia, and he is still in Hungary under governmental protection. There is another name, perhaps there are Polish colleagues in the room, Marcin Romanowski, a former governmental people in the PIS government in Poland, accused with corruption in Poland, and before being condemned, he was coming to Hungary, and Hungary gave him protection against another European member state's judicial system to protect him from the consequences of this corruption. So I think that this is also something to be kept in mind, that a single country or a few countries who are not respecting the rule of law, who are not respecting the general goodwill of cooperation in the EU, can create problem in all of the member states, because Hungary now is becoming a safe haven for all the corrupt, condemned politicians in Europe from the extreme right, and this is undermining stability and security of the judiciary system of their own country.
Thank you. Kate,
yeah, I think it's important to say a couple of things about the collaboration within the civil society space. So, because people in the room who are working in that area and want to know what's being done, some of the best practices, I think, with regards to mainstreaming these issues around gender, race, and other social categories. There's a social awareness movement, and it's very much based on collaboration because, again, the resources are so low in these organizations. So, for example, Taz Brooker's When We Speak documentary showcased Helen Evans at Oxfam, Catherine Gunn at GCHQ, and the Harvey Weinstein whistleblower Rose McGowan in conversation to sort of, through that documentary, the patterns of kind of exclusion and reprisal were really evident. And so it's kind of a strategy of visibilizing female whistleblowers. Other elements include, for example, people like, I know Wim van der Kachova will speak on a later panel, but his work alongside within his university previously at Greenwich, collaborating with Protect to analyse cases that were being taken to the employment tribunal to see what sort of patternings were happening with different genders taking cases. So, for example, mixed cases where there's discrimination or harassment as well as the whistleblowing claim tend to fare much worse. Or slightly worse anyway. Legal representation being really a difference between men and women showing up with formal legal representation to defend themselves is just two examples. So collaboration in that case between sort of universities and NGOs and CSOs. A really interesting one for those of us who are watching the tech space. Whistleblowing is also being used as a tool to highlight certain social justice issues. I think we're seeing more and more the use of technology to archive disclosures when somebody is making a disclosure about, say, a problematic person or a problematic system, and they think they're the only one. Technology now, like the Vaults and Service and others, are allowing that disclosure to be archived until enough people come forward where a claim becomes materially valid to take. And so what we have there is an issue, for example, that could be related to systemic discrimination or violence against gender or race that would normally be hidden. But technology allows the power of individual whistleblowers to be leveraged to collectivize it. So that's a game changer. I think the final one is, in an ideal world, every non-profit or whistleblowing support organization would have a helpline and expertise within the organization dealing with different characteristics of people who come forward. But that's not really the reality in terms of the resources available. So what we're seeing is some of the best practices that we've seen have come out of the tech sector, people versus tech being one example, and the whistleblower, the tech networks that are emerging, initiatives like the Real Facebook Oversight Board. What they do is when whistleblowers come forward, it's a collective of others from that sector, and that sector is one of the real features is there's been a lot of initial whistleblowing around sort of harassment and discrimination that's gender-based or racialized. So they'll explain to the whistleblower, these are the patterns of reprisal that we're seeing from this sector. Online smear campaigns, for example, where people's credibility, qualifications are questioned, where female whistleblowers are kind of singled out for discrediting in different sort of digital harassment. So it's that kind of specialized, sector-specific sensitivity to what a whistleblower might expect in terms of reprisal. That's some of the better examples. And again, in our report, I think, but as you can see, because resources are low, this is all collaboration-based, whether it's with academia, whether it's documentary makers, researchers, journalists, and so these are some of the things that we're seeing.
Thanks so much. I think I wanted to go back to Benedek on exploring a little bit. You stated very clearly how this difference across country can be problematic. But I think there might be some potential elements that we probably want to explore more in this like cross-country collaboration, and maybe also like with the European institutions playing a role in this like strengthening whistleblower protection to face those challenges.
Of course, it's the collaboration of different member states. It's very important because, and I would like to go back to the LuxLeaks scandal and Antoine Deltour's case, because basically Antoine Deltour was a Frenchman, and where the court case took place against him, it was in Luxembourg. And of course, because the company was based in Luxembourg where he worked, but I believe that partly because the whistleblower protection law of Luxembourg at that time was much more vague than the French one. And I think that this case, and again, of course, Hungary could be an example, but I think that it's not only Hungary. It's very important to acknowledge that in Europe, we are living in a single market where companies, and very often, of course, whistleblowing is against wrongdoings in the private sector. Companies are there everywhere, in many member states. And they have the opportunity to move things in a way to initiate a court case against a whistleblower in the member state, which is the best for them, which has the lower level of whistleblower protection. And from this perspective, I think it's extremely important to follow closely, and again, I would say that most of the people here know more about that than myself, where is the actual implementation and enforcement of the whistleblower directive in the different member states, because the differences between the member state regulation, or not necessarily the regulation, because we have seen, of course, a lot of regulations on paper, which are there in the legal system, but in fact, it's not enforced in practice. So this opens up a lot of opportunity to those who are threatened by the whistleblowers or whistleblowing to play a game to use those member states which keep alive the lowest standard of whistleblowing protection to retaliate them the strongest way possible. So that's why, and basically that was the initial idea of creating a European level whistleblowing directive, that we experienced this. That in the 20, at that time still 28 member states, there were extremely colorful, diverse system of the protection of a whistleblower, and this really opened up the possibility for the political elite and for the economic elite to make it easy to oppress those who were ready to speak to the public. It's really a huge achievement, and I think that it must be underlined even 6 years after the adoption of the Whistleblower Directive, how important it is that now we are having a European level protection which should be equal in all the member states, but also I think that it highlights the importance of the right implementation and enforcement of this directive, not to give this opportunity to people from different member states to use the differences among the member states to retaliate those who were spoken on in the interest of the public. And I mentioned Gruevski, I mentioned Romanovsky. There are people who were condemned because of whistleblowers and journalists who started to speak to the public about those corruption cases they had. Finally, they were able to use the differences among the member states to avoid legal consequences of the wrongdoing. So from this perspective, I believe that it's extremely important to go ahead and to put pressure on the member state and to really to be strong in pressing the member states to implement and enforce the regulation, not to open this gate for those people.
Very interesting. And I think I will go to you, Joan, because we are talking about differences between member states and how those differences can be used for whistleblowers and for those committing wrongdoing. So I wanted to ask you about the role of extradition in that context for whistleblowers and how that could be beneficial or not.
Sí, estamos en un foro internacional y creo que no se debe de dejar de mencionar los problemas que tenemos con los whistleblowers de corrupción internacional.
We cannot really, we have to think about international corruption cases in this forum.
Y en este sentido quiero mencionar uno de los problemas que están sufriendo estos whistleblowers. Es la inseguridad que tienen estando protegidos en su país o en un país, la existencia de una orden internacional emitida por otro país provoca que cuando cruzan la frontera, incluso hacia un país miembro de la Unión Europea, con su directiva whistleblower, estos son detenidos y se aplican las normas policiales sin que se les reconozca el estatuto de persona protegida ni la validez de las sentencias absolutorias emitidas en el primer país. Se corre el riesgo de ser juzgado 2 veces por los mismos hechos.
It was a long one. So basically the case is he's concerned about the difficulties that a whistleblower can face in a country when they have like an international resolution saying like looking for them, like for example Interpol, or like they have been prosecuted in a third country. and this can bring limitations to movement of that whistleblower, and creates these tensions between the judicial systems, between basically the country offering protection, the country A offering protection where that whistleblower resides, and the third country basically with the will of like prosecuting them and getting them in jail. So that's like a huge challenge that he sees.
Por ir a los casos concretos, recientemente esto le pasó a Hervé Falciani, de quien tengo autorización para exponer aquí su caso concreto. Todavía tiene vigente una orden de Interpol activada por la autoridad suiza, a raíz del caso de sobra conocido de denuncia de corrupción en el banco donde él trabajaba. Hervé Falciani fue absuelto en España de los delitos que la autoridad suiza le acusaba, pero sigue perseguido por las autoridades judiciales suizas. También fue protegido por las autoridades norteamericanas. Es decir, Hervé Falciani es una persona que tiene dos estatutos de protección, uno emitido en Estados Unidos y otro en España. Pero recientemente fue detenido en Italia.
So he quotes the case of Hervé Falciani, who lives in Spain. He had this proceeding in Spain where he has been like found not guilty of specific wrongdoing, but he at the same time he has like a court case in Interpol, and the authorities in Switzerland are asking for him. And at the same time, he has also protection from the US authorities, creating an extremely particular case where he basically went to Italy in holidays and he has been jailed for a couple of days following that Interpol requirement.
De este ejemplo concreto, una de las conclusiones que yo he extraído es que el denunciante protegido por un país debería de ser automáticamente reconocida esa protección por los demás países y que sus efectos se extendieran al ámbito judicial, policial y administrativo.
So his suggestion is like, if one country is recognizing a whistleblowing protection, this should be also applicable to other countries, yeah, from a legal perspective, from a judicial perspective, and from an economic perspective. That's his statement. And I think that talks very much with like some elements of like Benedek intervention. I wanted to turn to you, Kate, because you talk a little bit about different mechanisms from academia, etc. But I was wondering, like, what else can be done from everyone in this room to improve minority representation and measures in guaranteeing protection across different communities and different backgrounds?
Yeah, for sure. I suppose the first thing, it's a pretty obvious point, but if you're working for an organization that's not really prioritizing inclusion and diversity, and you're offering support to whistleblowers and you're proposing to your boss that this needs to be prioritized, it's going to be a bit of a paradox. So first of all, I think we should look at the organizations we work in, whether they're big or small, because there's no credibility, I think, or there's very little if you're claiming to sort of offer sensitive types of advice, and you know that in your own workplace as a volunteer, or it's not as a volunteer, as a professional advice giver, you're not given the same kind of consideration. That'd be a big thing. I think the SUSE tool that will be talked about later, so another work package in this Bright project, looked at what organizations are actually doing in terms of the speak-up systems and the arrangements that they have in place, and the results are just out, so you can download a copy of that, but you can definitely read that as an interesting analysis of what's going on. So we talked about the credibility deficit. If you're a certain kind of characteristic and you feel, right, in my workplace, this is from a worker's point of view, in my workplace, people who look like me aren't taken as seriously and not seen as credible. So when I disclose as a whistleblower, I won't really be listened to, okay? So what we're seeing from the research is people in those categories prefer to disclose through the tools or the systems, and they will be much more likely than somebody who's not within that kind of excluded category to disclose if a system is in place for them to do so. And they tend to prefer duty to report as well. So the kinds of professions where it's mandated that if you see wrongdoing, you should speak up. We theorize that there's a paper coming out in Gender Work and Organisation. We call that shielding. So when you feel like I'm not in the majority group here, I'm probably more vulnerable to reprisal. Those kinds of structural pieces are essentially shields that can help someone to disclose. So I think the SUSE tool report talks about how quite a few, I think 8 out of 10 organizations do allow anonymous reporting in channels. For people who feel like they're not going to be taken seriously if they speak up, anonymous reporting is incredibly important because then your identity isn't in play. Where if you were from, say, the authoritative dominant group, that's more salient, should be more likely. So that's incredibly important. One of the best practices, as everyone in the room knows, is that we're moving now toward organizations triaging a given whistleblowing situation and saying, how likely is it that this person will experience reprisal, and can we create protections in advance around them? So this is kind of where it's at now in best practice. But I think we're looking at sort of 1 out of every 2 organizations is not really doing that. They're not assessing the vulnerability of the individual. And the person who is doing that assessing would need to be trained in sensitivity to how social categories can exacerbate retaliation. I mean, it's different for every organization, but you're going to see reprisal often draws on the weaker elements of however that person is going to be perceived. So it's different from place to place, but it's critical to be taken into account by organizations and staff who are ostensibly protecting workers who are speaking up. So I think there's some of the more practical things, but we are developing a methodology tool as well as working with organizations within this BRIGHT work package so that organizations that going forward are interested in collecting data about these methods, and we're an academic institution, so we're very welcome if anyone wants to get in touch and use the tool for survey data collection, we'd be delighted to help. So I guess in the theme of our panel, collaboration is key, and there's help out there and research available and tools to use. So I'd welcome people to do that.
Thank you. So before opening to the floor, I want to turn to you, Marie, and maybe in a similar spirit, like thinking on the role of civil society in the future. We talk about collaborations, but getting more specific, like how do you see civil society playing a role in the community, and which could be the potential avenues to work closely with different colleagues here in the room?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very important question because civil society, we've been working on this issue for over 10 years, some even longer than that. So we do have expertise to share and experience as well. And for the past, for actually quite a lot of years now, we've been working with different stakeholders who have a role to play in whistleblower protection, and we've been trying to support them as much as we can in implementing internal whistleblowing system. For example, when you talk about private and public institutions, so we've developed quite a lot of tools for them. We have a best practice principles for internal whistleblowing system that we published in 2022. We just issued a self-assessment framework that goes with it. We're working on guidance on recording and reporting data on whistleblowing system to be able to assess if it's working well and what can be improved. And so that's all at the international level, EU level, so going back to trying to have maybe something that's a bit more the same across the different countries, so looking more at best practice than just your law. But at the same time, our national chapters are taking those tools and adapting them to the national context to make it relevant. And they use them they do a lot of trainings, workshops, some do e-learning courses. So depending on the country, there is a lot of initiatives there. There is a great example from Italy. So our TI Italy, our chapters there, together with Whistleblowing Solution, they're helping, they're providing actually for free digital platform for whistleblowing to, I think now it's over 5,000 public institutions. So just offering that for free. So that's, for example, a great way to make sure that whistleblowers from this institution can blow the whistle in a very safe way, and they can be exchanged as well, and so like to help them with their country. And I mean, a number of other initiatives, also working with trade unions. So for example, the Maison des Lanceurs d'Alerte in France, they're working with them to raise awareness of their members about whistleblowing rights, but also about the role that they have in supporting whistleblowers. And in Czech Republic and Slovakia, our chapters are piloting case law database specifically on whistleblowing-related cases, hoping that will help judges and legal practitioners in those countries. I mean, there are quite a lot of examples like that, so maybe I'm not going to go through all of this, but I think it's very important maybe to seek in your country. There is a wealth of expertise and experience with CSOs, and they're really keen to work with all the stakeholders to make sure that it is actually implemented and it is actually working.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we have now time to open to the floor.